WMO does not handle aquifers, so it doesn't fall under their purview, but the permitting and everything does, and people are getting uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have your speech ready, Trin?
When she's holding it close to the vest, she didn't show you the other side where she's got over.
She did a couple rough drafts today. Sweet.
Wow.
You get the memo.
I did not either. We have stand-up Carl if we want him. Are our new couple in yet? Did they come in yet?
Looks like next week.
Okay.
Which is feeling kind of quick on their end.
Just good turnaround.
Yeah.
It's like Christmas when that was.
Right? I'm not even sure he's here.
It reminds me of the old days of Girl Scout cookies when you had Cookie Day, and it was like the crates of cookies would show up at the Cookie Mom's house, and you had to sort them out and figure out who got what and where they all went. And
I don't remember that being fun in our house. My mom didn't love that.
Type A personality. My mom didn't have to do it.
It's like 7. She did not love
So was I.
It is 5:30. I will call the work session for March 2nd to order. We have a new employee to welcome. Jen, welcome. How are you?
Good.
Good. Let's see. Does somebody do the intro, tee this up a little, or should we just jump right into Two Truths and a
We
Lie?
gotta introduce ourselves.
Oh, sorry. We met. I'm Courtney. I'm the mayor.
I'm Christy Conrad. I'm with City Council.
Nice to meet you.
Eric Pursuant, City Council.
Nice to meet you.
Lori Sayer, also City Council.
Kayla Pasco, City Council.
Dave, I'm the city attorney.
Okay, nice to meet you.
I'm Brenda.
Everybody.
You know, everybody. Well, a number of years ago during COVID, we started Two Truths and a Lie because it was easier when we were all remote, and it kind of like then the new employee who's probably already in a little bit of an uncomfortable position of having to introduce themselves, like just can play the game and we can kind of go from there. So if you're ready and willing, we'll let you go.
Okay. All right, number 1, my favorite coffee drink is a caramel latte. Number 2, I've met David Keckner. He played in Anchorman
Oh,
and The Office. And my favorite vacation spot is Cook City, Montana.
I'm just gonna guess what.
okay, across the board.
Quite a few ones.
Couple 3s, couple 2s. All right, which one's the lie?
1, I don't like coffee.
Which is something for me, so that's what I was looking for.
She was too specific on the second one. I knew it was real.
Yeah.
I didn't
And obscure.
I didn't know if any of you would know who he is because
And I was given a watch
Watches
face like,
Anchorman.
who is that? Can I look that up?
Movie, but yeah, how did you meet him?
he was in International Falls. He was supposed to be doing a movie.
Okay.
And my sister-in-law works at the Chocolate Moose up there, so he went in there to have dinner.
Nice.
Did
And we happened to be up there, huh?
Did he say whammy?
Did he what?
Say whammy?
Oh, no. He was not in the right place of mind at that moment. He never did end up doing that movie, so,
Oh, that's
Yeah.
probably why he was unarmed.
yeah.
It wasn't the winter that he was up there, was it?
Was it? I don't even remember. It was
Okay.
quite a while ago.
Right. All right, and what was your third one again?
Cook City, Montana. It's
That's
my
right.
favorite place.
Okay.
I thought you might be pushing him under the bus, that's why.
We went camping out there a few years ago, and I don't know, it's just a peaceful, quiet little town.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
You are welcome to join us for the rest of the meeting, or you can use this as an opportunity to get up and leave. So
I am going to leave just because I had other plans, but I would like to sit through some council meetings sometime.
they're also available online for your convenience. So, right.
Thank you, nice to meet
Thanks,
you.
Jen.
Okay, let's talk about data centers. Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Dave and I are going to tag team. It'll be both of us. And we're hoping, I think all of you are hearing about data centers one way or the other, so we're hoping that will keep this pretty conversational. just lost the internet, so it's taking a second.
No, that's fine.
Are you on the internet?
Yeah.
Can you pull up
Pull
the
the
slides?
slides. Let me see.
I don't know about anybody else, but I have definitely
Oh,
heard from people about data centers, especially with the new one going in Chaska.
Should do it.
I don't know where it is exactly, but they've gotten the permits through, so.
Nice try.
I think
School
it's
something
by where the
drive.
other is,
By
Yeah.
what? Courtney, what did you say?
It's by the other ones. They have
Tucked back behind
off
By
of
like
like
Clover Ridge?
north side, yeah, north side of like England.
that complex there.
Had this issue before.
That
Wow.
makes sense.
2 strikes.
Yeah.
If not, we can view it on our, just tell us when to turn the page on the computers.
Next.
I was thinking that sharing your coffee order with everyone in the room is like a great way to get
Genius
someone to
move.
buy you a coffee. I'll grab one for the new. She likes caramel latte.
Caramel latte.
The same thing.
That would be fun if we did it.
You were tenured council members.
Let's just throw it into the universe. I would take any.
Yeah, I know, ice lattes, any flavor's fine.
You're around next?
Year round. Oh. I'm actually on my way to have a hot one, so.
Wow.
I know I like ice for them.
Okay.
I really am a hot.
Okay, thank you. Great. So the game plan for tonight, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what data centers are. We'll talk a little bit about what other cities are doing. There's been a plethora of Minnesota cities who have been faced with data centers. They've taken different approaches. The projects have looked different across the state. So we'll talk through that information. Current landscape in Carver, so I know there's been some questions about like the property that's developing with Messenbrink. That was formerly the UP project, if that could be a data center. What our zoning looks like, the space that we have available in town, some key takeaways, and then regulations and approaches that we can explore collectively with the council's direction. So what is a data center? The one on the screen is proposed in Rosemount, so that's been pretty big in the news if you've been watching it move through their processing. So it's the metadata center in Rosemount. And these centers primarily store, manage, process, and transmit data. So what that means is that it feels like a lot of servers in a room, and then what the servers need to kind of maintain what they need. So like the cooling system is usually something we hear a lot about with folks having impact of sound with the cooling system, generators, etc. And then why are we talking about this? Why does it feel like there's been such a boom? What's happening? So there's obviously been a huge growth in AI, which will require more data centers to be present. And it feels like Minnesota has been a little bit of a hot spot for them due to climate. So it's a cold spot for them because for several months of the year it's not as expensive to cool the centers just with our climate. So they're able to regulate them in the winter better in Minnesota than say somewhere like Arizona where you'd have to keep it cool 12 months out of the year. And then other things that people have been talking a lot about is available land. So like many developing suburban communities, we're surrounded primarily by farm fields, and these data centers typically require big swaths of land, so it feels like it could be adjacent to our city limits with some of the space that we have. Groundwater, utilities, and then some state tax incentives have also brought several of them to Minnesota recently, and it's been a big topic of conversation kind of across the board.
And I know what those tax incentives look like what, any idea?
Yeah.
I think, from what I understand, they were extended last year by the legislature, but they give them breaks on the purchase of like computer servers. Those I think were extended like 35 years. So it's not just the ones they buy now, but when they want to replace their servers, they know that those tax breaks are going to be here. That's probably one of the most expensive components to these things. And then I think they also had some significant breaks on their energy costs from an electricity standpoint. So those are the primary.
Okay. Help me understand, when you said that they were buying new servers, I mean, where do they buy them from though? Anywhere?
Well, if they are functioning in Minnesota, they would have to pay sales tax on anything
Okay,
they buy.
gotcha.
So it's the sales tax
Okay.
that they're getting the tax breaks on.
Okay, right.
Yep.
Erin, you might not know, but there looks like there are a lot of little exterior things in that picture in addition to two really big buildings.
Mhm.
Are those the generators, you think?
This is gonna be a guess from me,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say yes.
Okay.
So thinking about the impacts of data centers, there are impacts across the board. So economic, environmental, and political are three that we've been thinking about just at a staff level. So for economic, they are a great tax revenue generator. So these buildings are expensive. So they allow a city to collect a significant amount of tax revenue. So thinking about it that way, if it was just an empty property adjacent to city limits, it would be something that could come into town and give us good tax revenue. There's some local job creation, so a majority of it would be a construction job. I think in an upcoming slide, it was like the creation of 1,000 construction jobs and then 100 full-time permanent jobs. So heavy on construction, lighter on day-to-day folks on the property, spending time there doing work. And then development. So for some communities that are seeing these data centers, they're seeing them as a positive for development. So getting new people to the community, extending infrastructure, bringing other folks to the community for a job, even if it's only 100 people, that's really impactful for some smaller communities that are having data centers proposed in them. The environmental one, I think, is something that a lot of folks are thinking about. So water use has been something that is a concern. Millions of gallons of water are typically required for them. Energy need is also really high. If you're watching any news segment about it, you'll often hear from the neighbors of a data center talking about noise, how it's just a constant dull sound that they hear 24/7. So thinking about the generators that are on site, and then the cooling components can also generate some noise. And then there are a few studies right now on the comprehensive impact of them on the environment, just based on the growth in AI recently has obviously created the need for more data centers, but our timeline with those data centers has not been super long at this point, so we don't have a ton of data that goes very far back on the long-lasting impact that they could have on the environment. Political is another one, so if you've been following like the Hermantown data center at all, that one's been tricky with folks because the elected officials and city staff signed a non-disclosure agreement with that company, so they weren't able to share a lot of details, which to the public looked like a lack of transparency.
Is that legal?
So those are interesting because on the one hand, an NDA can't circumvent the Data Practices Act, right? We can't sign something that says we're not going to follow the Data Practices Act, but they're having cities sign these and effectively they're not creating any data about them. So there's nothing to get. One of the big pushes last year when the legislation was introduced about these tax breaks and other things at the state level was to ban those altogether. Because that's a lot of these issues are created because of lack of transparency and public confusion and the unknowns, right? So yes, they're legal, but to some extent, a city couldn't say, oh, we're not going to share data with somebody who made a legitimate data request and point back to the NDA to say that that's why we can't share it. So.
And they'll often call the project something that feels kind of mystical. So it'd be like Project Cloud instead of a metadata center.
Right.
So information in the city realm would be Project Cloud. So that information could be searchable, but it might not be the direct impacts of the Facebook Meta data center.
Yeah.
So it feels
They power it up a little bit and treat it up to what it is.
They're also almost always handled by like a developer who has an end user that nobody knows who it is. And sometimes, for example, the one in Pine Island, they have Ryan Companies working on that. Ryan Companies is a big developer in Minnesota. I think they did the ones in Woodbury 2 years ago for when Amazon had their new facilities out there. And so a lot of times they don't even tell the city. They say, here's what our use is going to be, but we're not going to tell you if it's Amazon or Meta or Google. I know the one in Pine Island just was in the last week or so, it was learned by everybody that it was Google, but nobody knew what it was until then. So that's, to me, it's interesting, but it also kind of fuels that fire again of like, people want to know what this huge thing in their community is going to be, and it's really frustrating when we're used to getting transparency from our public officials and from public employees and city staff, and in this case we just can't do it. So I think that's one of the issues that.
Yeah, if you want to breed mistrust, that's one way to
Right,
get started.
yeah.
Right.
But they probably dangle the carrot of there's
Right.
this project that will generate all this
Mhm.
tax revenue. We can't tell you what it is until you sign right here.
Yeah.
Have you, Brent, ever had to sign an NDA for anything in your, okay,
Never been approached on it.
okay. Okay.
Did you have a question?
I do. So data center comes in. What protects the residents of the town from increased electric rates or increased water rates? Is there a but-for provision? So if we didn't have this data center, your rates would have been this. But, 3 years down the road, there's so much increase in use, electrical load or water use that requires us to do something for infrastructure. What protects residents from that?
I don't know if there's been a comprehensive look at that, like what impact a data center would have on those two utilities. I think it can be, yes, they use a ton of water and they use a ton of power, but it's any other development too. Like, we were working closely with a cold storage facility about a year ago, and they would have used a ton of power too. And it's just, it's thinking that through, essentially, to say, like, a cold storage facility uses a ton of power, a data center uses a ton of power, and then treating them kind of similarly, which is the tricky part, I think, is maintaining that. But I don't think there's ever been like a run of utility
I know
systems
that
if a
those are
data center is
similar.
added.
Data centers don't just draw data for processing, they also have to draw it for cooling, and which is why they save a bunch of power here.
Yes.
But, so we don't know that, that's not. no
Not that I
answer to
know
that.
of, no.
What about air quality? When you see banks of generators, that looks like 20 locomotives parked outside.
So that is a piece of it too, is like the environmental permitting of them can feel a little bit clunky, thinking through some of those pieces of it. A little bit of a tangent, but something I mentioned to Brent when some folks had a question about the mess and brink piece, like could that be a data center? And based on that EAW, the environmental assessment worksheet that was done, a data center doesn't fall within the parameters that got approved that way. So based on square footage, an EAW or an EIS would most likely be triggered. These data centers that we're seeing are massive, so via state statute, those processes would be required to look at the cumulative impact of the built and natural environment. So it's when we're talking, we'll joke sometimes about the long-eared bat or the rusty patch bumblebee, but it's that level of scrutiny on these projects, how they'd impact the space that they'll be built on, air quality, water quality, traffic, sound is a big one. So all of that is covered through the environmental process that would be required based on project size typically.
And to the point about the EAW, that's that middle column on that chart in the last slide, that chart, I mean, that's really a big push and the reason you're seeing a lot of data center stuff in the news. For example, one of the large ones that's tied up in litigation is that Pine Island one. And I know that the plaintiffs who brought suit in that case are an environmental group who said that the EAW process didn't go as it was supposed to. They're challenging that they did that correctly. I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm sure there's all kinds of background and stuff going on with that one that, of course, not being involved in it, it's hard to know. But the reason that one's making a lot of headlines is because of that lawsuit, and that lawsuit is being totally driven by a nonprofit environmental group who doesn't think these are good for the environment. So the other point, Eric, just to answer your question too, cities of course have control over water rates. We have inherent statutory authority to determine how we invoice our customers that use water and how rates might be tied to specific uses and amounts of water. We really have no jurisdiction over energy or electricity in Carver. We're not a municipal utility that provides electricity. And usually those things are driven by state legislation and or the PUC or the Public Utilities Commission. And so that's interesting, of course, in terms of a question, because one of the big things is I've heard, and I'm sure you've all heard too, these data centers can use up, one data center could use up the amount of energy that like an entire city uses, right? Mm-hmm. Just for its businesses and its single family homes and multifamily homes and all those things. So there has to be an impact. on that. It's a supply and demand issue. And I know that the legislature is looking closely at that, including, and I think the feds are also looking at it too from a more nationwide standpoint, because these are making news not just in Minnesota but all over the country. So, although I wish I had a better answer in terms of how those rates are affected by them, especially on the local level, it's just hard to know because these are so new that we're not seeing a lot of the devil is in the details yet, because like the Rosemount one, for example, that is just about to finally open, and it's hard to know. Sorry, I cut you off from what you were saying before.
And then just a couple other things. It's a tricky spot knowing that AI is part of our lives. We're using it, we're using the internet, storing things, and then the impact that can have on the community that gets chosen to have the data center. So many of us contributing to the need for a data center, but not necessarily wanting it in the community in which we live.
For the noise part, if they're having continuous noise from these generators, do they have to have a buffer of space? Is there any law that says you can't be this close to these homes or whatever?
Yeah, so the rules that we have are via the MPCA. So it would be noise generation at the property line, and then there's different decibels you can hit during the day or at night, and then you apply different uses. So an industrial user to an industrial user can be louder, where industrial to residential, the allowed decibels are lower.
Mm-hmm.
So we would use that same information from the MPCA for noise.
I don't know how much this means to you, but I think it's like between 60 and 65 decibels, and you can only, from what I know, these generators run pretty consistently and for long periods of time. So the PCA rules on noise, they don't deal with like impulsive noises, like just loud, like fireworks or things like that.
Isn't it like 5 minutes out of the hour you can
It's
be
5 minutes out of the hour,
You can be
yeah.
outside of your decibel range, so it's like
Yep.
the random car backfiring.
Sure.
You couldn't call the city and say, hey, my neighbor was loud for a minute, because it was a minute out of an hour instead of continuous.
Yeah, and to Erin's point, it does matter what you're next to. If you're next to other industrial users, the levels that you can use or can meet or not exceed are a little higher than if you're next to a residential area. We looked at them with Les Schwab, I think, just because they were close somewhat to some homes, of course, and I've looked at it a lot in the pickleball context, believe it or not. So those happen a lot too.
We believe that.
So then when we're talking about the people are seeing, or are hearing, I should say, they're not seeing it, they're hearing a continuous buzz or noise though. So it's not like lights where you could say, okay, foot candles have to be 0 at this property line. You can still have that background noise that's coming over,
Correct.
right? The wind blows in every direction, but whatever. So if you put it into, or next to residential areas that have already been there, you're gonna be adding, they're going to hear it, right? There's no way to not hear it. Is
As
that
long
right?
as they're under that decibel threshold, yes, there would probably be some ambient noise from them.
Okay.
For comparison, a household refrigerator is 55 decibels. And they say 60 to 65 decibels is a normal conversation. And he's saying that's what the limit has to be at the property line.
Correct.
So the conversation we're having right now is about 60 to 65 decibels.
Okay.
Depends on who's talking. It's really hard to study noise, and like even with these PCA rules, when we've done sound studies and had other organizations do them, it's really interesting because they have to use the right type of equipment. You can't just go out with your app you downloaded on the Apple iStore or iTunes store and try to measure sound, because that isn't accurate. I mean, it can give you an idea maybe, but people will come into City Hall and they'll say, look at this pickleball noise that I recorded last week and it's exceeding this, and this is a violation of the MPCA rules, but it requires some specialized equipment and scientific inputs and all that, so, which I think is interesting, so.
That's part of what concerns me. If it's hard to measure, it's probably harder to enforce, right? And then these folks have money, right? So what are they gonna say? Like, sure, we'll pay the fine if we can be louder? I don't know, I'm getting too far ahead of ourselves, but I don't love the idea of the noise.
Well, I just for a little context, so back in the day when I worked for the city of Victoria, the condos were going up behind it, and they were getting complaints about the noise coming from Floyd's. So they had to buy a decibel reader, and then someone had to stand out there and read it when they got a complaint, and it was a pain, almost such a pain that it finally just dropped off, and
Yeah.
they didn't pay
They see you out there and they're quiet.
yeah, it just, or then people just kind of stopped complaining because it was just, how do you, nope, you were under, and they're like, no, we weren't, it was too loud, and then it just doesn't go anywhere either.
Yeah.
Right.
So thinking through some cities, these are some popular ones you've probably heard in the news recently. So Rosemont is the meta project that was successful through permitting, so it opens in 2026. Again, that's where I got that 1,000 construction jobs, but only 100 long-term, and it's on 280 acres of land. Hermantown has been another one that's been in the news recently. Just a lot of folks showing up for public meetings. The city council recently approved a zoning change for the project, so they rezoned the property. But the city council right now is saying they haven't committed fully to the project, just the rezoning change. So the proposed project is 4 buildings on 200 acres, $650 million project. When we talk about taxable revenue, for some of these communities that aren't seeing a ton of development, that's a deeply impactful project for them. Egan is one that you probably saw in the news in the past week or two, so they just did a 1-year moratorium for data centers. So what a moratorium does is it allows you to pause, and then you need to study and make a plan for what your take will be moving forward. So we can't just say, we're doing a moratorium and then do nothing. We need to develop a plan how we would work through a data center, what it would look like with zoning regulations. So it's typically a year process.
Can a moratorium at the end become a no? I mean, because you work through the process, does having the moratorium mean you have to find a way? Or can you get to the end of it and say, yeah, it's not gonna work for us?
You can typically get to the end of it and say no. It just kind of depends on the specific use. Like, for example, we had a moratorium in place for cannabis, remember? In that situation, there was state legislation that says we can't prohibit cannabis businesses. So in that case, we could not have said no after the fact. We had to come up with some regulations. Generally, as it relates to data centers or really any use, you can say no to things, but you also have to make sure your provisions aren't arbitrary and capricious, and you can't treat, certain users differently. If one user has the same impact from a land use perspective as another type of user, you can't say no to one and yes to the other. You have to be able to sort of identify reasons why and talk about why this use is different and why we're saying no to it, and maybe saying yes to certain other uses, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I shook my head when you said that, because I thought this would be one of those things where we've got to find a use for it somewhere in our plan. We can't say like, no thank you. That's one use that we're going to absolutely say no to.
I'm not aware of any legal prohibition on saying no to any specific use. If we can identify reasons why it's different and isn't workable in our community legally, you can prohibit uses.
Okay.
There's a lot of cities that prohibit different uses, and in fact, I think the default is if it's not listed in our code as a permitted use, it's prohibited. Because there's so many uses out there that none of us identify in our code, right? There's thousands of different businesses and uses that someone could use their property for that might not be specifically referenced in our code, right? I would always take the position as a city attorney that those are prohibited unless proven otherwise, and unless someone can tie them to another use that is allowed, say that they're the same or they fit into that category. I don't see any reason why you can't prohibit it.
The details matter though on that, where if the provisions say because of the noise, but then Lakeview Industries has that same generator, then you have a problem.
Okay.
So to Dave's point, it can't be arbitrary, but there can be unintended consequences if you create rules that prohibit something that you would tend to support, and so that review is delicate, I would say.
Yeah, you have to point
Egan
to.
shows the megawatt threshold.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That was
Well, that was for a moratorium, but yes, I think that's where they're going with that, is they're going to probably be looking at data centers of a certain size. And to just piggyback on Brent's comment, you have to, with any zoning provision, you have to point back to public health, safety, and welfare. And if you're incorporating findings into an ordinance that says to protect public health, safety, and welfare, and or more specifically, the noise issue and this size thing, or this, you have to differentiate that from other things that you allow, in order to make it legally enforceable and not, invalid, otherwise you could run into issues.
So for example, we could inadvertently run into a problem with, for example, the cold storage, because it would have a similar high energy usage to a data center. For
if that
example,
was the way- yeah.
if we used energy as a basis, for example.
Right. And then just informal conversation with some folks that I know at Egan, one of their drivers is they have these large corporate campuses that are now kind of largely vacant. And so they're trying to protect job centers, which is, for what it's worth, maybe a little bit different than like a greenfield development project. And so it gets back to every city's going to have its own circumstances, and that might be a good segue into like maybe available property.
Can I talk about the Chaska one quick?
Well, yeah.
So the Chaska one is a little bit different, where as an adjacent community, Chaska has not had a similar response as other communities. Like if you compare a Chaska City Council meeting reviewing the Cloud HQ project versus the Hermantown City Council, it's a vastly different landscape. And part of that is I think the way that the Chaska operation will run. So they used air-based chillers, not water, so there's not a direct impact on their water system beyond like what a development might need. So I think that was a big piece of it, is that some of these data centers can feel less spooky if there are ways that they mitigate things, like if the water isn't a concern, if that was Chaska's number one, they found a different way to do it. And then the Cloud HQ project is a large purchaser of renewable energy. It won't be on that site specifically, but that's something that they've said in most of their approvals, is that the company is committed to renewable energy. They're just not able to do it on that site. So as community members, you probably have heard a little bit about the Chaska project, but a different general acceptance of the project versus some other ones we've seen across the state.
It also might help that they already have a server farm in that area, so people are already kind of used to. It's kind of like our second affordable housing development. It's a lot easier to put in than the first.
And just to go back really quickly on one thing about prohibiting something. I mean, there are ways to make your ordinance, I think, have less of a target on its back. I mean, if you just did a prohibition on data centers, I haven't seen a city do that yet. I think you'd be on sort of the forefront of that endeavor, and you could make yourself an example for a lot of big companies with a lot of money to say, well, we're gonna go after these now so that other cities don't get ideas. Because just someone said it, they have a lot of money, and they might be very much worth it to them to go after it and make headlines because they're suing a city who wants to prohibit something. There's ways to make your ordinance, not prohibit outright, but also maybe strategically set yourself up for situations that, maybe we could have small scale data centers that work in a certain part of town, in a certain type of district that we don't even have yet. I mean, just kind of throwing examples out there. But I do think when you think about this strategically, there can be a lot of value to not prohibiting something, but rather thinking more big picture and kind of, again, creating that proverbial smaller target on your back than if you're on the, trailblazing the prohibition train, which isn't always a great thing
And it's
to do.
similar to the cannabis discussion. Like we had the option to do buffers. So we would allow cannabis businesses with XYZ buffer. It wouldn't necessarily probably be a footage point for this one, but it could say no development in Carver can exceed X amount of gallons used per year with a forecasting number. So there are ways I think that you could allow them but protect folks around them and be able to control the process a little bit more than what some communities are going through right now. So thinking through our code, land that's available, etc. So we don't specifically have data centers in our code. I would say most communities don't right now, but it's something they're obviously working on. Egan being the moratorium, they're obviously working towards some type of ordinance or zoning regulation. I would say right now we don't have land in the city of Carver that would typically work for a large scale data center. So any project that would need to, that a data center might look at would need to be annexed into the city, zoning change, et cetera, several reviews by the city council, and annexation is always contingent on the city council. So we have that piece with us too, that annexation is not a given, it needs to work for the city as well. So right now we don't have land, I think, that is super data center ready. Might someone be able to combine some parcels on our very northern growth area and make it work? Maybe. But that's not something that we're hearing right now, just based on where our city limits are, the type of development that we're seeing. So there could be options in those areas, but right now a large scale data center likely doesn't fall anywhere in our community, but potentially could in our growth area or across County Road 11, Jonathan Carver Parkway in Chaska, or north when we get to Victoria. So some of those spaces it could happen, but right now it's not something that's keeping me up at night, that we have this huge property that's really ripe for a project that we're not ready for.
Can you remind me, Erin, when you say far north, are you saying far north side of the growth area?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of property in between current city limits and those parcels, right? And so, although maybe there's some parcels that could theoretically be thought of as maybe being combined for that kind of use, the infrastructure that would have, as we all know about filling infrastructure gaps in Carver and in the growth areas we've talked about, it can be tricky and expensive. And so I say that because I think a lot of the thought that goes into this is, well, how desirable is land for these developers? I think there's a lot more desirable land out there, which is why we're not seeing as much here maybe as other cities are right now.
Slide. So some takeaways, I'll do a couple of these and then hand it over to Dave. But the projects are happening in Minnesota and they're often contentious. They often hit some pretty big news circuits, so you probably have heard about several of them, but there probably are several projects that we're not hearing about that are happening where a community is really excited for that tax gain and the jobs that they can create for a community. Emotions will likely be high for a variety of reasons, so you'll have some folks that maybe are excited about the project and some folks that are terrified of what the impacts will be. Most cities do not regulate data centers right now, like we mentioned. Egan is at the forefront right now with that moratorium, so it'll be interesting to see what language they develop and which policies they move forward with. We don't have any pending projects in Carver, so now's the time that we're being proactive. So we're not having to pump the brakes and try to find a way that we can take a step back and learn some more. So as always, planning, thorough review, and public transparency are essential. I'd say in Carver, those are some of our core values, maybe than other cities, to toot our own horn a little bit. But we would always want folks to know what we're working on and why. But there's also the balance of economic development with long-term environmental impact, but also public trust. So making sure information is available, transparent, we're sharing information should a project come to Carver. I did all those, sorry. I'll let you do the last slide. I said we were gonna share that one.
Last slide. So let's talk about options. We've talked a little bit about moratorium, and this council does have some experience with recently with the cannabis moratorium. Essentially what it does is it allows us to say, okay, we're hearing a lot of things about these things. We realize our code, city code, does not specifically address data centers. We have certain industrial uses and other types of general language in the code that don't really go right to the heart of what a data center is. Why don't we just press pause? We'll say for now, these aren't allowed. And we'll let planning staff, consultants sort of talk about how they might fit in Carver and what that would look like, and then come back with recommendations. And that way we don't have to scramble and all of a sudden we get a phone call from a developer who wants to do something and we don't have to react, we can be more proactive. There's of course the statutory authority for a moratorium. It cannot last more than a year. And the way we do it is through what's called an interim ordinance that would come back to council for consideration. Those do not go to planning commission. You don't have a public hearing on interim ordinances, but for two exceptions that wouldn't apply here. So that would be one option, and then staff could take some time and think about it and look to see what other cities are doing, and really maybe talk to the engineers about water and where it could fit, if it could fit, and all those things. The other option is to, kind of skip the moratorium and go right to the planning and zoning amendment process, which, frankly is a little hard to do when you're under the gun and you're not feeling like you have some time. Again, the nice thing about the moratorium is that you don't have to rush and you have up to a year to do it. And then, of course, option 3, which is always an option, is you could do nothing and wait for something to happen and be reactive. And I don't necessarily condone that option, but I don't think staff does either, anyone does, but that's an option. A lot of cities say, look, you know, we think our code's okay, and if it isn't, we'll figure it out. So I don't want to not say that that's an option as well. So we're happy to answer other questions, talk through these options a little bit more. Just from, anecdotally, I think from the standpoint of what a potential zoning amendment could look like, I think it could be myriad things. You could create these as a permitted use only in a new type of district that maybe is confined to certain parts of the city and or its growth area. You could make them conditional uses and create some performance standards that we would look at. Again, a lot of this is hard to think through and forecast too much because, we really just have the information that you've seen and we've talked about tonight. But those are just options of potential zoning regulations that we could think about and bring back to the council to talk through.
Dave, when you say performance standards, is that the no water use above, no electrical use above?
Kind of. I think it would be buffers potentially from certain areas or setbacks, property setbacks, construction materials. But yes, you can get into potential resource. Those are really hard to like put your finger on though, because I think when it comes to these data centers, I think technology is changing so rapidly that maybe something that is really scary today might not be in a year. And like the one in Chaska, they're using air cooling. So I don't know if you could require a certain type of cooling and then all of a sudden, wait, maybe those coolers are louder and use more energy or electricity than a water, And I've also heard things about how there's companies working on these like recycling systems that will let water be significantly saved and still cool these servers the way they're cooling them today. Why that's not out there already, I'm surprised it isn't. Maybe it will soon be. So it's kind of a moving target, but performance standards generally are a list of things that in order to even meet our ordinance, for us to approve the conditional use permit that you're requesting, you have to check all the boxes in terms of the performance standards. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, guys. Well, I'm 100% for the moratorium. I think that gives us time to look at all of the information, get answers to the questions, like water capacity is one thing I'd like to make sure that we hear back about is if they are not doing air cool, they're doing water, what does that do to our water tower? What does that do to our water capacity? Do they drill their own well? Is that something like that gonna suck all the water from our water table? But anyways, amending the zoning will probably what comes at the end of the moratorium, but it leaves us open to something we're not prepared for if we just do the amend zoning and not. So I am all for the moratorium and taking that to give staff time to get us in the right track.
Thoughts on that side, Lori?
Yeah, I know we want to be transparent. I have a perspective though on the data center. So like 15, 20 years ago, there's a company in Eden Prairie called OnTrack, and they became Pro OnTrack, but they were a data center. Anyways, I used to work there. And just at that time, just the way their like a data center was, is people, they didn't want other companies to know where their data was being stored. So like that's why you get that, feels like they're not being transparent about what company. But I think that's changed since then. And also that Pro OnTrack, then it became KL, and they got really into the e-discovery business. And today, like what I've last heard is that would not, it's right by Hennepin Technical College, but that would not be a location that a data center would probably want to build because they have different risk factors. It's too close to a small airport. So there may be places where they don't want to build. Then I have a question on time frame. If somebody came next week and said, we are going to approach these landowners, we're starting this process, and then go to the planning commission, there's several steps to the process. Like, what is the shortest it could be?
So
or like a range, like hypothetically.
For a property outside of city limits, in your hypothetical, is it guided correctly in the comp plan?
Yes. Yeah.
Annexation is typically, it's a 30-day review by the township, city council, and then a 30-day review by the state. So that can be 60 to 90-ish days depending on meeting dates, so that's the first step. Moving through concept plan to final plat, I would say is probably a 6 to 8 month process to final approval. So those two things together, I'd say a year. Based on size and environmental review is probably required, so an EAW, but that can fall within some of the work that can be happening while you're working through annexation and prelim plat. But I would say a year-ish is probably as fast as it could happen.
Okay, and I wanted to ask that first because I also favor a moratorium, but I didn't want there to be like a worst-case scenario where we say we're going to take 10 to 12 months, and then here, there's a hypothetical that it would hold something back, but it's like that time frame would be shorter than this hypothetical.
Well, if the council approved and adopted a 1-year moratorium, just like when we did it for cannabis, if things are done in 8 or 9 months, the moratorium goes away. I mean, the termination language on the moratorium would say the earlier of 1 year or when we update our zoning regulations. And so, I think frankly, it's going to take some time for staff to think through this, and I do think also like using a lot of that time could be beneficial because so rapidly changing this environment. So it's like you want to kind of use as much of that experience and external evidences and from other cities' experiences as possible. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't get something done in 6 months that this council loves, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean the full year.
But we would be faster at it than that process that we call that hypothetical.
Correct.
I also favor the moratorium. I think we owe it to our residents to do something. And even if that something is to have a really good discussion, transparent discussion about what this looks like for the city and then decide we don't need to do anything. I think we owe it to our residents to do that because it's clearly on everybody's mind and people are clearly concerned about it. So I would favor a moratorium just at the bare minimum to figure out what our plan is, because the last thing I want is for this to show up on staff's doorstep and for us to be scrambling to figure something out while we're dealing with an NDA and while we're dealing with residents' concerns and while we're dealing with the whole process of annexation and rezoning and everything else. So this is one piece that I want in place before somebody shows up at the city.
So we're really fortunate to have some other communities around us go first. We get to see that. And I also support a moratorium. However, we get 1 year, and it sounds like we're not an attractive target for a data center. Do we want 1 year to start from today, or is it in our interest to delay that as things are proceeding in these other communities? Is there a risk to waiting to start that 1 year timer? Is it better for us to do that?
It just kind of depends on when those scales are tipped then, right? I mean, somebody theoretically could identify land and have it under contract and...
Well, if there's a risk of that, then now. It sounded like we may be low on anyone's list.
And also, it'll be a resolution via the council, so that will happen the first meeting in April.
Interim ordinance.
An interim ordinance, first meeting in April. So that's a month from now. So that is also, our moratorium process would start after the ordinance. So we have an extra month right now kind of leeway where other folks are already working on this that they're gonna finish their processes faster than we are, but we can look to them to see what they did, how they got there, what was important.
I just want to use that year wisely. Okay.
I understand that, but I think the other thing about it is that once we have something figured out, we can go back and change it if we look around us and the environment has changed. But we should have something in place to protect our community from the start.
That's the point that I was gonna make is, I get it of like the crystal ball question of when's the right time, if we want a full year to think about this, but we don't have anybody knocking on our door right now asking about this. Do we gamble? and wait 6 months and then talk about this fall. I don't think we do that.
Well, that's why I asked.
Yeah. I also feel like a moratorium would help me feel better about this. Like, this was really informative. This is great. I was sharing with Brent and Erin, there's a really large data center going in Port Washington, which is in southeastern Wisconsin, in my old stomping grounds. And it has gotten a ton of news, even more pushback. And I'm not even sure that I understand like why residents hate this, right? You know, like the noise, the usage of water and electricity. But I think we just need to know a little bit more of like what's an option. I think there's a closed loop system with water that isn't as big of a water user, but like, do we want this in our community? I think the other issue that could be standalone from data centers is, and I don't know if we could have a policy of this, but like, I hate the idea of signing an NDA for anything, right? Like, our community would love a grocery store, right? But even if it was a grocery store, I hate that idea of that lack of transparency. So I don't know if that's a policy that we can make that's for council and for city staff going forward to kind of cement that
That we wouldn't-
desire to have
Sure.
transparency.
Would there ever be a case where we would sign one of those?
I think the reason most cities sign them is because they really, they believe in the development. And
Okay.
that doesn't mean that, some cities, I mean, it's proven that some cities are very in favor of some of this development when there might be a subset of your residents that don't want it, and they're the ones that are mad about the NDA. So I think those cities are saying, if this is what you're telling us is necessary to make this happen and further conversations with your end user, we're happy to do it. I do think that would probably come, a policy would be tricky to, because I don't really know, I mean, maybe we could think through that, but I think it would more come at the time, right? Is it right to sign this or not? We could have that discussion then.
Okay.
Rather than to set up a policy that might be inconsistent with the council's either goals or strategies or viewpoints that might change, or even a different kind of user that you really like comes in and they say, we have to do an NDA for this reason.
Sure.
So,
Outside of just this though, would we ever sign an NDA for
very,
something?
very rare. I would say it's very, very rare.
The closest we come is a gas convenience user.
Oh,
With a quick
those
trip
are the
that
good
wanted to be
days.
announced.
Oh, gotcha, yeah.
But
Oh, I think I remember
I've never,
like
in my
having a-
career, I've never been asked the
Yeah.
question, so I just,
And I feel there's a lot of almost like gentlemen's agreements of like, hey, this is happening, but don't tell your friends, this is Facebook official yet. And I think we're good at, you know, before folks are ready to come in, you know, like next month, this is gonna come in for a concept plan or whatever. And understanding just that when there's a user that's not ready to go in prime time and make it Facebook official, that we honor that as a community from both the staff and from a council side. But the whole NDA and formalizing it and like, those to me, I think in my mind are like longer term, bigger agreements. I don't love that idea at all.
Well, we can always choose not to enter into one.
Right.
We don't need to codify that, we can always choose that.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Okay. Do you have what you need from us?
yes.
All right, thank you guys. Okay, AMIs, a meter replacement program. Oh, sorry, Andrew and Lynn, I was just thinking of.
Who's writing the slides?
Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council, and
Just a
Brent
little
for
slide.
running the slides. I don't even remember when we met last. Was it a month ago, or was it the last meeting?
December. Or no, right? No, I'm thinking of something
Yeah,
else.
this year.
I was thinking of private wells.
Anyways,
Uh,
there were a few questions that popped up. One was the frequency band. So Core and Main told us they operate in the 900 to 950 band, whatever that means. But it's a licensed frequency owned by Census and it can't be repurposed in the future. So hopefully that checks that box. Neighboring cities, Chaska is currently undergoing a meter change out and moving to this technology. not with core and main, but they have different meters because they have the electric as well as their water meters. Chanhassen, they have operated under the AMI for like 12 years. I think they had to be one of the first ones in the area to do that. And they have the Neptune meters. They have several collection points around town due to their topography, which is similar to ours. So here's a map, a little distorted, but these are the locations of the SR2 meters, which are the older style meters that would need to get changed out so it would be compatible with the system. A lot of those meters are older than, they have not been installed basically since 2010. There's a sprinkling of houses that look like they have the SR2 meters, and that might have been an issue that timed up with COVID and not be able to get the meters because a lot of cities had meter shortages at that time.
So the red ones need to have new meters?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the
And-
neighborhood on
I
the
think
north
you're-
side is a COVID neighborhood.
Right.
That's my neighborhood.
So they got some weird meter shortages back then, which are all squared away now, but so a lot of those, especially like in the Bluffs neighborhood, those are approaching 30 years old.
How come all the older houses in the Bluffs don't require them?
They could have had their meters changed out by then.
Okay.
So that's another point, we're trying to change out meters as we lose communication with them or they die. So changing out meters is an ongoing process. So a part of this project, would be one, yes, the AMI stuff, but two, also the meter change out and getting them all done at the same time rather than piecemealing it over the next couple of years.
So just to emphasize that these meters get replaced anyway. It's just a matter of, do you do it over 5 years or over 1 year? Your long-term plan contemplates doing it in 1 year, so you have the financing to make that happen.
What does your house have?
Mine, I have written down. Yeah, right there.
So that would be a great data verification thing.
Christy's house is old, so.
So when you go home tonight, take a picture of a meter and send it to us.
Yeah, I'll be right on
And
that.
verify.
Let's text them all at the same
What?
time today.
Midnight.
Is the useful, what is the average useful life remaining on the meters that need to be replaced?
A lot of them are past 20 years.
And that's typically when you want to start thinking about changing them out, is 20 years.
So like the ones in the Bluff, I can't remember, Lynn, if our chat had.
Is
So
there any
there's
chance that-
342 meters that are older than 20 years. So
Of the 500 or so.
of the 500 or so. So there's a big chunk of them that should be replaced now.
Should have already been replaced.
And then there's 113 that are within 15 to 19 years, so quickly approaching that lifespan. And then there's like 42 that are less than 5 years old.
The COVID houses.
So, and I think that about equals what we had on there. So there's a big chunk that should be replaced today. Propagation study, they were able to get us what one tower would look like versus what two towers would look like. So the two towers covers, I think it's like 98% of the houses. The only issues with the two tower is kind of the ones that are tucked up against the bluffs down by Creekside Park there. But one, we'd have a lot of gaps, and then especially where we're looking to expand to the southwest and to the west and to the north, that second tower would be needed sooner than later.
So with that kind of dead zone along Main Street, what is that, Main Street West? is that, you had talked about there's another little repeater that goes in there or something?
You could put a repeater, I mean, since it's in like that blue area, there's like the one-way communication. So it's, potentially you could get the read.
Okay.
And you might not get it every time, maybe you get it in the winter when there's no leaves on the trees, stuff like that. Otherwise it would just be drive-by.
That's a short stint to
Which,
drive
for,
by.
yeah, which especially when our public services facility will be down here someday potentially, like, that's gonna be.
We
a-
drive by that.
Well, you drive by the whole city, or you drive by like
You drive.
half a mile right there?
Yeah.
So that's like overall what the coverage map looks like, zoomed out a little bit. Janhassen, I think, has close to 7 stations. So it'd be nice to just have 2 for a long period of time. So then this is where we have the metering system and install is $160,000. And then there's setup and training fees, so we know how to use it. That's huge. I can think of several instances that even like in the past month where having access to this data would be very helpful for us. Then the software fees, that's ongoing.
Does that include the resident portal? I know that was an option.
I don't know, Lynn, what do you know?
I think that's separate.
So I think that's an addition.
That was like $7,000, wasn't it?
Yep.
Okay.
So anecdotally about the resident portal, my therapist lives in Plymouth. And they have, I think it's Plymouth that she has resident access. Is it Plymouth that has it?
They probably do.
They probably do. It's up that way. Anyway,
Plymouth
she was
does
telling me
things.
that when her son was born, she got an email from the city because their water usage went up. That the amount of laundry they were doing was enough to trigger the system, and they got a notification. So, I mean, anyone who's had kids, that's not unsurprising, but just as an idea of like, it does work. It does work. It does trigger to the users.
I really liked that aspect of this system, especially as we're moving to where people are on an app or improving our website. I would like to see this go forward with that resident component of the software. So if we're looking at cost, I'd like it presented with that. That's my opinion.
I think the plan initially was to get it rolled out so that we know how to use it before rolling it out to the residents.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll shut up.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that conversation, that we wanted to get ourselves
It's a good.
really comfortable and trained in before trying to roll something out and then try to troubleshoot that at the same
As
time.
long as we're able to add that later, and there's not a
Absolutely.
$12,000 charge to add an additional plugin.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so that portion of the project would be $193,000, and then to go replace the meters that need to be replaced, and the MXUs that are associated with those meters, it'd be $296,000. And I think the CIP has currently budgeted both of those portions of it.
Yeah, covered.
Dave, can you just do a little commercial on the purchasing authority for this is a little different than how we would usually do like a public bidding process.
Right, yeah, no, so usually when you are looking at contracts that exceed $175,000, as the council's probably heard that number before, because that's what triggers the public bidding threshold. In this case, we're dealing with a sole source situation where we already have a meter system that we've begun using in Carver, and it's based on a certain type of meter that is only, there's only one authorized dealer that sells these in Minnesota, so we really have only one option. It doesn't make sense to go out for bids, because if we want to buy from an authorized dealer who can give us the warranties and the guarantees that we would want, we are going to be purchasing from them. So there's no sense in wasting the time and effort and energy and going out for bids. I guess we could jump through those hoops, but we have a statutory ability to kind of work around that. It would require the council to approve a resolution sort of memorializing the findings, why we're doing that, why we're not bidding it. And that's the exception to the public bidding requirement that we're talking about here. So if you do want to move forward, just expect there to be a resolution about that on an upcoming agenda that would allow us to take advantage of that exception.
Anything else you need from us?
Just if you can share your support or
Oh,
opposition
sorry.
to moving forward.
I got the feeling that we were all in support. Is that not? I support it.
Support it.
100% supported.
I support you with, but I have one more question. So what I'm looking at says the long-term financial plan has allocated $296,000. We're looking at the CIP budget of $203,000.
2 different buckets.
Okay.
One's for the meters and one's for the.
And one's for this. Okay, all right, that was it, but yes, support.
Given that we're looking at the end of the useful life of the vast majority of these meters anyway, I see no reason why we shouldn't go ahead with it.
Great.
What you need from us?
Yes.
Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah.
Okay, city manager's report?
Yeah, some fun things to share, kind of team related. So today was the first day for Sergeant Josh Baker, the Carver County Sheriff's Office. So he's going to be out at your April 6th meeting just to do kind of a true truths and a lie. But already just came in, introduced himself to the team, talked about issues. We're gonna, once he kind of gets his feet wet and is aware of kind of more of the community nuances, we've talked about doing a kind of a series of work sessions where the council has an opportunity to identify some public safety goals. Right now we have that 4 to 5 page work plan that's, I think, largely ceremonial. And so I think if we can kind of simplify that and really target some key initiatives that the council wants to see, I think we're gonna see some success. We're gonna facilitate that closer to the summer. Wanted to highlight Mallory and Lynn's work on the 2025 audit. Got a lot of kudos from the ABDO staff on the preparation work that Mallory and Lynn took part in. Wanted to highlight Jordan Wolke's work as the utility superintendent. There's been a smattering, I would say, of discolored water concerns, primarily in that west end area where we had some previous kind of looping issues. There's a large water main where this water doesn't get through that area, and until it warms up, we can't do a flush, but Jordan and that team, along with Andrew, have really been kind of, I would say, crushing it on whenever we get a report of concern. It's a phone call and not an email, and so Jordan's touching base with them and giving them some best practices on to handle the problem kind of in the interim and kind of walking through it. And I think that's just been a great success and a kind of a sign of the dedication that him and Craig and Brian and Caleb have towards resolving some water issues that have been kind of lingering for folks. Got a very nice email from a resident regarding Brian Matson. I can share out to the council, but just gets into, long story short, he had an inspection and checked out their smoke alarms. Am I saying that right? And windows, and just kind of that, if you've spent any time with Brian or frankly Nick, it's not a surprise to see kind of that kind of level of care and kindness. And then got a call also from John Messenbrink. You might meet later on in the United Properties. He's kind of the new owner of the United Properties site, and was kind of gushing with our team's response, specifically Erin's, on how we've been kind of helping them navigate a really kind of fast track process for their development. And so we probably don't spend enough time kind of lifting up our team to the council, but some really great examples of the work that the team is doing on a day in and day out basis that I think would make you proud. So wanted to share that.
Awesome, thank you. Any council requests? You guys making eye contact early? Okay. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Councilmember Conrad,
A second.
second by Councilmember.
Okay.
That's why I'm always like, such a good thing when you're here. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you.
What are you gonna do at 12?